How are white people stereotyped in predominantly non-white cultures? As a Caucasian who lived in China and other parts of Asia for some years, I'm generalizing a couple of stereotypes I came across, i.e. not everyone has them. White people are all from the US, I'm not, and can all speak English. White people all have money. White people have more beautiful skin or eyes. White people who marry a local and have a kid will have a very smart child, because it's mixed. White people cannot understand Chinese, so it's fine to talk about them openly even when they're 1 meter away, never mind if they understand every word. Many white people have a more open attitude towards relationships. White people can be more rude, but that's mostly okay because they don't know better. As a pink, white, in China, I pretty much never encountered hatred or open attacks. Their for better or worse, slightly favors white, which I suppose has to do with the average income of foreigners there. Chinese have a lot of whitening products advertised, which I suppose may have to do with certain lower status jobs like field workers having more exposure to sun, hence are darker. However, my views are filtered from the I as white encountered. In other words, there may be a lot of stereotypes I never heard of because no one told me, or because of the language barrier. I speak a bit, but wouldn't understand everything. All in all, Chinese were incredibly open and friendly, including being openly outspoken about race. Note that the stereotypes some Westerners I talked to had about Chinese were much more brutal than this. They're like ants, uncreative, can't be trusted, etc. were some of the bad highlights I encountered. Also note that the stereotypes of Chinese in relation to blacks are worse too. Talking about race, I've asked a couple of Chinese, what would your parents say if you dated a black guy? And the answer was often that the parents would be strictly against this. As a final note, let's repeat. Above stereotypes are not held by all Chinese. Maybe not even the majority, maybe even only a minority. They're just some patterns I ran into. Are you still living in China? My friend told me that the bit about Chinese people talking about white people in front of white people is so true. He says his mom sometimes does it. Sorry. But once they did this again and the white guy basically replied to their question in Chinese. Lol. Story 2. Among Dominicans, white people are considered rich and generally friendly. We also think that no crime occurs around white people. It is considered highly respectable for a Dominican woman to have a white man, even if he is a low-life dealer. I can honestly say that most Dominican mothers would rather have their daughter date a white junkie, garbage man than a rich black doctor. White people are considered so above everyone else in our society. The funny thing is that to outsiders, Dominicans are black. Dominican women in the US want to be as far away from black culture as possible. They think they're white, basically. It is quite funny. When I went to the Dominican in October, they treated us like freaking royalty. It was ridiculous. Our busboy also told me he hated black people, which confused me. I assumed he was talking about Haitians. And all of the women wanted kisses from my blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid. They'd all call him over with Nino Blanco and ask for kisses on the cheek. My husband said, well, at least we know he'll never have a problem with the ladies in the Dominican. Story 3. I've lived in Tokyo most of my adult life. There's a stereotype hierarchy which goes from foreigner, that's the most important, then to the subsets of white, automatically considered a loudmouthed American who only speaks English, or black, automatically considered a hip-hop gangsta who only speaks parody MTV English, or Asian. Yes, that's a stereotype in Japan. You'll be considered a dirty, poor Asian. I'm a musician, and unfortunately my appearance means I fall into a further subset. Dangerous foreigner, probably a dealer. Because in Japan, everyone assumes most crime is by foreigners. Actually, crime by foreigners is proportionally much lower. So I get stopped by the police all the time. I should add, just as being a black guy in a nice suit getting coffee in Manhattan is a very different experience from being black with sagging pants and walking into a truck stop in Alabama. So Japan has a wide range of contexts which will affect your treatment here. If you're just a tourist, you'll only notice that people in stores are generally very polite to everyone. Story 4. As a Chinese person who mainly grew up in the United States, I don't know much about how whites are stereotyped in China, but my parents do. Essentially, in China, people have a love-hate relationship with white people, wanting to be like whites, which is mainly just Westerner. By the way, in Cantonese, a slang term for black literally translates to fermented soybean, because of the black color of fermented soybeans. Because of the power and status it represents, but at the same time, are resentful of that power and status. People will fall head over heels around a white person, to the point where they'll just hire random white people to attend important parties or become spokesmen for products. Contrast that with the disdain they have for Chinese that come from America. My mom once said that if you, as a Chinese American, ever want to go back to China, you'll get better waiter service if you bring along a white friend wearing a business suit. Sad, but true. There was an Economist article a while ago that talked about how Chinese were crisscrossing Europe to buy lots of Western goods, because it was a symbol of status in society that you could afford to buy those things. Many Chinese, likely due to the lack of education and exposure, are what I like to call extreme passive. This means that they have very stereotypical views of their ethnic groups, but they don't plan on taking action on those beliefs anytime soon. I am sure it is like this for many cultures as well. So you're saying that if I moved to China and brought all my suits, I could do well for myself without a full-time job? Story 5. There's a few stereotypes I grew up hearing in an immigrant mixed race. South Asian and African, family in the West. These mostly seem to be about middle-class white people. Note, I am simply reporting these. I do not agree with them. I'm writing them as if my grandparents are saying them. E.g., white people don't love their kids as much because they kick them out when they are 18 and don't support them after that. Also, white people are not as educationally driven when it comes to their children. E.g., they won't work long hours in a multitude of jobs and save pennies to send them to the best schools and hire extra tutors and focus on their kids winning maths championships, etc. The exception to this is Jewish people who are very admirable. White kids, in turn, put their parents in nursing homes as soon as they're able, which is unacceptable. White people are all into artsy-fartsy things like liberal arts and art school and painting that don't get you anywhere. They don't realize that the only worthwhile paths are medicine, law, engineering, pharmacy, sciences, accountancy, and business. White people eat really bland food. Like they eat things like chicken cooked only in salt and pepper and carrots and strange creamy sauces. White people like to go to India, Africa, etc. to discover themselves, which is hilarious because then they start wearing saris and things and thinking that if you use curry powder, you've made a curry, and attributing erroneous spiritual wisdom to ethnic people. White people are not as clean. For example, white people will put clean clothes on an unbathed body in the morning and they only use toilet paper in the bathroom, as in they only use toilet paper and not water to clean their bums. Also, they wear shoes in the house and own lots of cats which walk on their kitchen benches. White people have more random intimacy, especially white women. If you take them to a fancy restaurant and give them a rose and chat about poetry, they will sleep with you. Disturbingly, this is according to my grandfather. That's all it takes. Some white people smoke grass with their kids. White people drink a lot, especially white women who often inexplicably consume wine alone. White people are obsessed with wine. Oh, and one more. White people are too gentle with their kids and don't discipline them properly. Story 6. My wife from Cameroon was very surprised when she first saw white people that were poor. She didn't think it was possible. However, once I went to visit a market and I heard a guy shout, "White people are rich, but not this one. This white guy is poor." That was probably a clever way to get my attention to sell me something. Maybe as a consequence of being thought rich, white people are very important or prestigious. Once we met a cousin of my wife who was bragging that her husband had several cars. My wife replied, "Yeah, well, my husband is white." In Cameroon, most people believe in sorcery. One guy who was apparently knowledgeable about these kinds of things told me sorcery doesn't work on white people. Number 2, in the mountains of Peru, it is an urban legend of sorts that white people will steal children. So much so that when I'm around a misbehaving child, the mother always threatens the child by saying that the gringo, me, will take you away. 3, back in high school, we had 60% foreigners, Korean or Taiwanese mostly. The funniest thing I've ever been called was a round-eyed burger muncher. Kid was serious too. 4, when I lived in the Middle East, I was told by an Arab friend that she always thought that white people, mainly the women, were very stuck up. It explained a lot of the not-so-nice things some of my classmates said about or to me before they got to know me. Number 5, I lived in a predominantly Hispanic area. And one thing was always associated with white people: money. You were a rich white kid no matter how much money your parents had. No matter where you lived or how poor you were a rich white kid. Number 6, in Zimbabwe, white people are thought to have no knees. This is due to them wearing long trousers or dresses all the time, apparently. This is also apparently extremely funny. Number 7, I've been to Liberia a couple times, and I picked up that a lot of the people there think that white people are rather ignorant of how the world works. They're very nice and helpful, but they make you feel like a child sometimes. Most of the time, you have to rely on the actual children to figure out what the heck is going on. Number 8, in my family, I was always told by my parents white people were lazy, never put value in education, and had no culture of their own. Number 9, a lot of my Middle Eastern friends think that white people only ever eat turkey and mashed potatoes or meatloaf. That last one is ridiculous. We only eat bacon cheeseburgers and fries, of course. Since you're halfway through this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel so you wouldn't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. Story 7. In Western China, where seeing a white person is so rare that people would stop dead when they saw me, stare, and often pull out a camera to snap some pictures of me or with me. White people are considered beautiful, fashionable, sometimes ignorant, and a little sneaky. They assume we all speak English. Most people assume that I was British, I'm American, because I'm skinny. In fact, I had people ask me after finding out that I'm from the US, "Why are you not fat?" I didn't talk a lot about politics with everyone, kind of a touchy subject in China. But I talked about it with a family I was living with. They thought that Americans are warmongers. They thought it has been too long since we had a real war on our soil, and we've forgotten what it's like. We go into war to try and help people, but their opinion is that war helps no one. Story 8. The stereotype of whites amongst South Asians is that white people can't manage their finances properly, and that they are, in a sense, selfish, self-concerned rather than being considerate about others, and that parents kick out kids at 18 and kids throw their parents into old homes, all because they're self-concerned and only care about their lives. Also that they can't plan for the future, part of why they're poor with finances. Also, white people, particularly Americans, are scared of everything. Seatbelts or pollution, etc. By that I mean to an unhealthy level of being scared of stuff in their minds. That's generally the stereotype. Keep in mind the thing of most importance to South Asians is family, and it's family or social circle that they feel deserves the most consideration. Given the highly populated natures of these countries and the laissez-faire styled capitalism or society, one quickly realizes being considerate to everybody is shooting yourself in the foot, unless everybody else is also considerate, which is rare. Thus, this consideration is limited to your family or friends. It's not as extreme in South Asia, in that they're willing to help a random stranger if it isn't detrimental to them. But the further extreme in an even more populous country such as China can be seen with a toddler or van accident. So I'm just giving that perspective, where they're perplexed by why white people don't have any consideration of the ones they love, family. Also, you folks with the fans, South Asia or East Asia, and you dolts, I don't mean whites, are literally afraid of seatbelts, rather than wearing of seatbelts from fear. Story 9. I'm South Asian, and I think most of the stereotypes I've heard come from the fact that South Asians, and most Asians for that matter, are still very collectivist, while America is becoming more and more individualistic. Therefore, people assume Americans don't care for anyone besides themselves, have no respect for family, as someone mentioned, putting your parents in an old folks' home rather than caring for them personally, and have no culture as a byproduct of not having any traditions or community. Interestingly enough, I know many people in my parents' generation who immigrated to the US, abhor the idea of their children, my generation, taking care of them in old age. They like the idea of being independent, and have no desire to do the work that generally goes along with staying with your kids, like looking after grandchildren all day. I think there may have been some confusion, so let me clarify. I do not endorse or believe these stereotypes, I'm just commenting on what I think is the source. Story 10. Among younger Westernized Asians, there's a significant inferiority complex. I tend to use the Tyler Durden analogy. They're smart, capable, and most importantly, free in all the ways that we are not. Every time I hear an Asian girl say, "I don't date Asian guys," or hear an Asian guy ask about why white girls don't like Asian men, the first thing I think of is how that idea has manifested itself in their minds. I think a lot of you are missing the point a bit. This isn't so much about white people and Asians hooking up, it's more about how we tend to put white people on a pedestal or we should be happy with ourselves. There's also nothing, for instance, that says Asian men and black women or Asian women and Indian men shouldn't start dating. It's not as if intimacy with them is worse or something. I think the mindset that a white person is the best possible mate you can strive for is a bad one to have. That being said, I'm single and bi, so come at me, ladies and gentlemen. All colors are welcome. Story 11. The whole inferiority complex thing can be pretty messed up. As a Westernized Asian, born and raised in North Vancouver, Canada, self-identity was a difficult thing to come to terms with. The majority of my friends growing up were white kids. The majority of television shows I watched featured white people. I listened to music made by white people. I think, write, and speak perfect English. It's hard not to become absorbed in white values. It's easy to pick up on what's socially acceptable in white society because you're an active part of it. It's also easy to fall for that pretty white girl because you've been raised to find the same attributes attractive as any other white male brought up in white society. But wait, there's more. You look in the mirror and realize that your skin is yellow. You realize that your parents are immigrants. You realize that the pretty white girl sees you as an Asian kid, despite how much you think you're white. So you start doubting many aspects of your identity. Because you grew up in white society, you don't quite fit with the FOB Asians. At the same time, you might not fit in with white people either, depending on how open they are to minorities. This really depends on where you live. Personally, I've come to a point in my life where I don't really care. I know that I'm different from both white guys and FOB Asians, but that doesn't change who I am. Screw labels. I'll be whatever I want to do. Now bear in mind that the above often doesn't apply to second or third generation Westernized Asians, but that point in the family tree, identity in Western society has already as often been firmly established. It would probably also help if you grew up in an Asian community in Western society. Story 12. Depends on the white people. I'm West Indian, by the way. Rednecks. Drink crappy beer, have pickup trucks in their front yards, sleep with our sisters, have mullets, don't value education. Bad teeth, barbecue a lot. Presumably roadkill. Suburban yuppies make several misguided attempts to try to make up for everything the rednecks do but fail horribly, e.g. hold cultural parties like Cinco de Mayo and Chinese New Year, try to make nice with their kids' minority friends, etc. Own minivans, go to sporting events a lot, eat terribly bland food. Young white people, privileged yet paradoxically hate their parents. Common to all white people, bad dancers. I live in the US. Story 13. I lived in South America for 9 years. The predominant stereotype is that white people are rich, entitled, and immoral. White people are seen as easy. The former comes from nearly a century of cruelty from the US government and corporations, particularly the latter. US tourists most certainly do not help alleviate this. As a white guy, I ran into a lot of prejudice until people realized I was far more South American than American culturally and spoke perfect Spanish. These feelings mostly manifested in me getting charged roughly 10 times the cost a local would whenever I went anywhere or bought something, until I began to haggle in Spanish and they realized they had made a mistake judging me. I wanted to offer my own experiences, and noticed most of the stories refer to Asian stereotypes. Story 14. I've been in Western Central-ish Africa for the past 2 months. I'm a Christian missionary, a different topic for a different time, but that does put me in some places and villages that most only ever see on National Geographic Channel. I must say I'm not all that surprised by the adults' reaction or attitude toward white people, being that the typical interaction with whites is just when they bring free stuff to give them. They believe that white people, or really anyone from the Western world, is rich and actually expels fecal matter in the form of money. The kids in these areas are a real good example of that idea. You're taught a tiny bit of English at an early age. It consists of, "Hello, how are you? Give me money." That is the only thing that sticks out that they think. I almost forgot. I spent a month in Western Kenya and have spent this past month just outside of Kigali, Rwanda. Oh, and one more minor thing, I've also spent some time in India as well. Holy sweet Jesus, the roads there were terrifying. One thing that I was extremely surprised with is that even though they do think that Americans, thought of mostly just as white people, are fat, they also laugh at us because we cannot eat as much as them. Kind of a goofy one, but it's what I've seen. Story 15. In Brazil, there's no stereotype against whites because everybody either is white or has white relatives. Only people stereotype blacks. But here's the deal. Our national race is a mix of native Indians, sequestrated blacks, and immigrant Portuguese. Until the mid-19th century, that's all we had. Then our rulers thought, you know what? We're too black and that's not healthy. We better bring those hungry, educated Europeans here. They work more and will improve our race. True story. So, especially in the early 20th century, European immigrants flooded the Brazilian coastside, especially southern and south regions. The descendants of these immigrants form the majority, almost all, of upper middle class and the upper class. These late European immigrant descendants are rare in the lower classes in almost all regions, but the South. In the South, Poles are almost as poor as blacks, but in general, if you have blue eyes, fair skin, good hair, and a pretty, non-afro nose, you're a rich boy. So we have this general racial and cultural mix here. But to this day, 100 years after the great immigrants, you can almost tell that someone's not poor because of their race. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. People from Japan. What's the biggest what the thing you've encountered from Western culture? Story 2 was outrageous. See you in that video.